Welcome back to NASCA TV. Our citizens and our communities expect the same quality experiences from their government that they get from the private sector in everyday lives. This month's focus is customer service and experience.
Hello, I'm Scott Wayne and welcome to NASCA TV. We are coming to you from Southern California. We're behind the scenes at the NASCA Summit. All around us right now are Chief Administrative Officers getting ready for boot camp for new officers. We are hidden away and we're seeing all kinds of traffic from our colleagues wondering why Joel was selected for this particular interview, and clearly because he's the best. Joel, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Scott. Thanks for having me.
Joel, first of all, how are you and why are you here?
Well, there's all this military stuff around us. I thought boot camp is a great place
It is
for us
appropriate.
to be.
There's helicopter carriers on the horizon.
Right.
Apaches flying
Lots of
over.
ships in the distance from the Navy. But really, I think as we were talking even before we came on, there are certain things that we have missed out on, all of us, over the last year and a half. We all had to, for the most part, and we did this in Wisconsin, we sent people home very quickly. We had to deal with how do you work remotely? But there's a richness and a power to being able to gather together. And frankly, lots of lessons that we have learned over the last 18 months that you get to share in an Uber ride with somebody or over a dinner or a cocktail or things like that. And so I think it's really important. NASCA's done a really good job of bringing people together and talking about issues in very real time over the last year and a half. But now that we at least can, maybe start to get together a little more, even though the ground still continually seems to shift. I think it's really important that we are able to do that.
Yeah, we're going to be flexing here in terms of safety protocols and making sure it works. But how does it feel just being surrounded by humans again and your fellow people who've been going through similar situations for the past year and a half?
Some of them have changed. we've all been changed, but it's and for so many of us, we see people only in mass, or we see them in different settings, and really it is terrific to be able to do this together. I'm not somebody I don't have a career in government, in state government, and so when I have a chance to get together with colleagues who have decades worth of experience, I think that's very beneficial to me and to my state. It's also a situation where we've all had to learn very real-time lessons and adapt very quickly over the last 18 months. And, there's absolutely things that we can be learning right now that maybe I'm going to go back to Wisconsin and employ next week or the week after.
So we're saying the power of NASCA, if this is a little commercial for NASCA, is that you're going to steal ideas from your colleagues and then take them back to Wisconsin.
Everybody does it. Everybody does it. I can guarantee you.
All right, so I have a brief here on my iPad.
Change the name. We may change the name.
Sorry. We'll protect the innocent. So I have a list of very formal questions here for you to answer, and I may ask you some of them. But today we wanted to talk about sort of customer service and experience. And I'd love to kind of just start with the existential, which is, who is the customer of state government? How do you define the customer? When I say customer service, who do you think of?
Well, the thing that I guess I would tell you is I think that's a different answer you'd get in different states depending on what the Department of Administration or what the chief administrator does. But in Wisconsin, the Department of Administration has purview over enterprise-wide functions on human resources, on fleet management, on procurement, on real estate. When it starts with customers, it's the 35,000 people who are state employees in the state of Wisconsin. That's the first one. And then we're a service agency, as opposed to some of the other agencies, where you have a very direct constituency. Ours is the legislature, my fellow colleagues in other cabinet agencies, the governor, and to a certain extent, there are real customers out there, real people who we continue to. Yeah, and in our case in Wisconsin, a lot of what we've done, and maybe we'll talk a little bit about this too, is we've had responsibility for administering a lot of the federal funding, and so that has put us in touch very much more directly. One other constituency that we have in Wisconsin is we're also responsible for regulating all the Indian gaming and the tribal gaming. And so, having that direct nation-to-nation responsibility of that relationship with which our governor, and every governor takes very seriously. Yeah. So it's, a mixed bag. And again, and you could sit 50 people down in this chair,
and it's entirely different
response.
So one of my favorite things is watching you all when you're sitting down for a cup of coffee and describe your mandates. Everybody's like, you have that bit? Well, I have this bit. It really is not the same role. I think that makes this role somewhat different from other government roles.
It is,
Yeah.
and I also think that in some ways, in my role, traditionally, it's like, okay, they're the problem solvers. And when there's a big issue, they've got the resources and the tools to go try to help come up with the situation. The one thing that in some ways I think it's another reason why I think NASCA is going to be more important and our colleagues are going to be more important. We all kind of have this baseline that's been established over the last year and a half of, okay, we've all had to live through COVID. What's that going to mean through, there's going to be changes to state government as a result of that. So, in some ways, our colleagues, while we have different things that we're going to be doing, we have some of the same things that inevitably we're all going to be dealing with.
That you're going to be doing. So when you're describing sort of your customers, you're immediately this sort of multi-stakeholder prism of people that you've got to look through the lens of, and I'm thinking right in this room here is going to be the new CAO boot camp. I guess lesson one is your customers is diverse, multi-layered, and would include not just the governor's office, but the legislature and the civil service that's supporting all of that, and then the end customer. So you're constantly having to think through, which is very different from if you're a service business that's an ad agency and your client is your corporate client and you've got to keep them happy. You just focus on that.
One customer to do it.
Yes. So lesson one is sort of multi-dimension mind as you think about different aspects. Why is it, look, if I were to wander out into the streets here and say, customer service is important to state government, I recognize we're not in Wisconsin, but I suspect whichever state we're in, there'd be some raised eyebrows, which is like, oh yeah, sure, I've dealt with state agencies before. Why is it important?
Well, I mean, we've never had a better lesson on why it's important over the last year and a half. I mean, I just saw one of our largest state universities in Wisconsin just did a survey, and I think that it came back that 10% of the people thought that things were working well in Washington. 85% thought Washington was broken. In the state of Wisconsin, it was maybe 33% thought things were working, about 60% thought it was broken. So,
on a relative basis,
people don't have a heck of a lot of trust in government, but at the same time, more people have accessed government services than have needed to, through unemployment, through rental assistance, through direct support to businesses, all of those things that have brought us much closer to individuals. The other thing that I think has happened over the last year and a half is it's forced government at different levels, especially in public health, to be working together, where there hadn't been communication and infrastructure before around testing and contact tracing and all these things that there were collective need for information around. We have been forced to do things in a little bit more efficient manner and tripped along at it and not done anything perfectly. But I think hopefully those have long-term benefits for all of us.
So, I think the general public is joking about their DMV experience in every state across the 50 states, where if I could summarize it, and I'll speak for the place I live in the Commonwealth of Virginia, where it's like, oh my God, this has been the greatest experience I've ever had, ever at a DMV. And everything that was executed, I think people are like, couldn't we have just done this before? I mean, have you been tripping over from a customer service perspective, both internally within government and out, these things that it sort of forced teams to look at and say, we got to push through? And so first, do you have any examples of those? But secondly, how do you keep those wins, but also keep that mindset?
Yeah. Well, I'll give you just a couple of examples to start with. So, in our DMV, this is very personal to me. I have a daughter who's 15 and a half, who's going to be going for her driver's license in 6 months. But because of what happened during the pandemic, and you couldn't do in-person driving tests, there was a pilot where parents could decide whether a child needed that driving test or whether they had done everything else. And for those of us who at 16 years old had to take that driving test and had sweat on us, I mean, it's a lifetime experience, but it's also one that can be unnecessary, unnerving for the wrong reasons if your child is ready to go. So that pilot has grown into the potential of that being a permanent program. We've had more people at the DMV who have been renewing their license and their license plates online than ever before. All of those things. But things like at the Department of Natural Resources, before the pandemic hit, people were forced to still get their stickers for state parks, like by sending it through the mail or going to a service center. And we've had this reawakening where everybody wants to go outside, and we've had unbelievable visits visitation. But we pushed to get that online, and it's immediately been a huge success.
So what is that thing? Because if we're on the West Coast, the home of Silicon Valley, like there is that just that constant drive to focus upon that customer journey, that customer experience, and remove any barriers to that interaction. And clearly there's an enormous profit motive for that. How do you transplant that crisis mode that has allowed state government to do that? How do you keep some of that going without, having people running on adrenaline 24/7?
Right, and that's just the thing. It takes a level of innovative kind of disruption that I think in some ways there has been a comfort around the public sector in, and if nothing else, in the last year and a half, we have been made very uncomfortable. And we've had to come up with these creative solutions, and maybe figure out that 3 weeks later that solution didn't work. Let's go and and try this differently. It has been very much a triage and learn by example, and I do think that there are longer term lessons for that. In our own department, like in the way we deal with real estate, prior to the pandemic, you had to physically drop off all your plans for a real estate project. You did an in-person interview if you were part of it. Right. Now we're doing those things virtually, and those things will, you can, just like we say that there's richness about getting together, you don't read somebody's body language in a Zoom call if they're doing it for a multi-million-dollar state project in the same way you do if they're in person. But you have to kind of start to figure out, maybe your questioning is a little different. Or maybe you start to, so all of those things become part of the innovative approach that is absolutely necessary in government. But I do think that some of it is infrastructure related too. In Wisconsin, as in many other states, we've had a real problem with our unemployment insurance system, where it was overwhelmed. And part of that is that the infrastructure is 50 years old. The legislature was told a decade ago, do something about it. They didn't. And so, we're left kind of holding the bag there. But if there's collective interest in making sure that the next time or a next time like this happens, you need to make those investments.
So is that you saying that part of the department's role is going to become advocacy for the customer, in the sense of, yes, this thing was kicked over to the legislature, but there's even more pressure to make that case for why it's important for that longer term investment?
Yeah, and I think we all have kind of the bottom line, and we've heard from constituents around that the process that we have doesn't work as well as it needs to in a time of emergency. Yeah. And what are we going to do to prepare for a next time that, I hope not the next time. Yeah. I hope we're not going to have to live through a similar situation, but some fashion of it is going to come. There'll be an economic downturn where some of these resources are needed again.
Oh, one can imagine. I mean, if you look at the sort of public reports that are coming out of Washington, that cyber might be a similar profile to this dynamic, and you're sort of taking lessons. I understand. So Wisconsin is relatively unusual in the United States right now in having a split government. You've got a legislature and a governor from different parties. How has that affected in any way, and maybe nothing, but how has it affected the customer experience for government?
I think unfortunately, a lot of what has happened is stasis, where when it comes to the legislative process, through the budgets that the governor has introduced, there's a very powerful committee in the legislature, probably the most powerful legislative committee across the country, that has a lot of purview over the budget, and they have driven a lot of that. And so, from taking myself out or injecting more of what's gone on in the last year and a half, what we do have in Wisconsin is the governor has sole authority over the coronavirus relief funds in 2020 and the ARPA dollars, the rescue plan dollars. And so a lot of that has meant more direct support for customers, and more direct support and more immediate than having.
And your team have been in the front line of this.
Probably 75% of the money that's gone out to various constituencies that's non-public health related, our department has worked with. So, the live event industry, the lodging industry, nonprofit sector, there's the movie theaters, all the minor league sports, places that you can imagine though people gather who didn't have a chance to gather.
You used to work for a museum or a science institute. Yeah, okay, so
I come on it. So the other good thing in terms of personal gratification over this, it was knowing people in the industry, kind of knowing where they were, not having lived through the same thing, but knowing that the situation they were in, and being able to provide at least some of the tools to help.
So you could empathize very quickly with what they were experiencing, and you're the person coming to that.
I was in one of those situations in a nonprofit where, and in the nonprofit world, often you think, okay, if there's one thing that we can always rely on, it's earned revenue. We're real proud of that earned revenue. The contributors may not be there, but if people can still walk in and buy their ticket, we have found a way to make that challenging. And so, that's where government's got to step in, and we have been able to support them, through to a place where they can get that
back. Yeah. Is it coming back?
It is. I mean, unfortunately, with the Delta variant and the politics around vaccination and all that, it has made it more challenging, I think. And again, that's the disappointing thing. It's probably, there are variations of this around the country. You certainly see it nationally, but in Wisconsin, it's the polarization around things like wearing a mask or getting a vaccine that have made things harder than they needed to be for all.
So it's interesting that this theme is around customer service and experience, because one could argue that there's a bedrock, you touched on the surveys earlier, of these debates that's somewhat vested in whether people trust government or not. I mean, there's this sort of superficial stuff going on, but there is this sort of layer of trusting government. And I recall we were interviewing Sarah Steelman, and she talked about just how important it is to protect people's belief in state government. And arguably it'd be a different experience from that with Washington, or treat it as different. Do you fall in a similar camp?
Yeah, in some ways, because the closer you get to it, the more it feels like it's personal to you. And I do think that, but in some ways, I think it's just unfortunate that ship has sailed in terms of trusting government. I think it's more about how are we delivering the right kind of services, and but there are things around. We've spent in Wisconsin, as others have, tens of millions of dollars around rental assistance. It's one program where there federally is plenty of money out there, and the Treasury even today, I think, released some details about how little of the money has been spent by the states. But part of the challenge for us is we're working through a network of providers around the state, and we need to go even deeper to get to community organizations that the people who need the resources trust, because they don't have that level of trust in government, and especially if they're in certain populations where they think that their immigration status might be at risk, or other things like that. So for all of us, it's about the network of those relationships all the way down to the very personal level that we've got to do. And that's kind of the ultimate of customer service. Is it's all a relationship business.
No, there's this great metaphor that the ability to deliver a tough message around crisis all depends upon the strength of the bridge of trust you've got to walk across. And if we're experiencing that. This is interesting to me. So you're having to run a department, and all of your other colleagues are having to run departments that are focused on day-to-day efficiencies, right? Normal run-of-the-mill. But you're also asking this to be a crisis response team as well. How do you lead your department in that sense? So how are you saying, look, we've got to be constantly innovating and improving customer service on a day-to-day means, but we've also got to be providing advice to our fellow agencies and departments about how to get through this crisis. You're expecting quite a lot of duality in your employees. How are you talking to them about that?
Yeah, and I think the only thing that any of us can do is around transparency and communication wherever possible. We did, prior to the pandemic, I have a department that's got 1,400 people in it, and they're spread over the whole enterprise. Yeah. The HR people who work for the Department of Administration are in the DNR.
You have them embedded.
So it's hard to gather everybody together. But what we've been able to do as a result of COVID-19 is we do bi-weekly town hall meetings that are, some a quick presentation by me, something else. This last week it was on cybersecurity and on, cyber hygiene. But it's some details about doing your job and some about, customer service and all those. And then it's questions around, parking, and return to work, and workplace flexibility, all of those things. So trying to make sure that there is transparency and that there is still connectivity, and that medium has actually probably improved that for us over the last year and a half than just trying to gather.
Because your people are dispersed by nature, the link to virtual is now meeting, actually advantageous for you. Yeah, okay.
But it's still less than perfect.
Yeah, but Yeah, you have breweries in Wisconsin, I hear. There's
We have
a
a
brewing
couple.
industry. You
Yeah.
have a way to get your people together when you need
Yes.
to. Excuse me. So you have all of these sort of different types of customers. If I were to say, how do you know how well you're doing? How are you getting feedback from all of these stakeholders?
You know, that was one of those questions, and we don't do a lot of customer surveying. You know, frankly, that's something I think I'm going to try to find some more from my.
Is there somebody
colleagues
wandering
here.
these corridors that has a good answer?
But I think we do, you know, and again, I would kind of look at it separately over the long term of the work that we do. You know, you certainly hear from those who are not getting good customer service no matter where you are. But in the near term, and more recently, especially in the COVID-19 response and in the dollars that we've had to spend, you know, we've heard directly and we've developed programs directly with those constituencies. I mean, you know, so I say I come out of the nonprofit world and I worked with the live event industry over the course of my career. But when we were putting together a program, we called and talked to people who run those types of organizations, because there isn't a playbook for how you would do this. How would you provide federal, you know, support for them? And so they helped us actually, you know, craft the program. It was of some benefit to them, but they were doing it more for the industry. And so, you know, it really has been about kind of getting real-time advice and real-time feedback from constituent groups like that in order to, you know, to be able to pivot on a dime and change things wherever necessary.
That's really interesting, because you're talking about the department essentially being an interchange of best practice. So you're leaning on various stakeholders to, hey, give us guidance about it, and then pushing that through state government across the different agencies.
And I don't know that there's a different way that you could efficiently do it right now, or, you know, unless you're doing, you know, real monolithic programs. You know, I mean, we've had to be able to, you know, to do some things to, you know, to build the plane as we're flying it on a lot of these federal programs.
I never enjoy that metaphor.
Well, especially since we'll all be on planes in the next couple of days, it's probably not appropriate.
Last question. Why does it matter? Okay, so, you know, if we were in Russia or Central Europe right now, we'd be like, oh, it's the government. You just wait in line, and you're like, why does customer service matter?
It's ultimately, I hope, that why we all get into public service. You know, I mean, it matters everywhere because, and your motives are different depending on what industry you're working. But you get into
let's say that. So if we were running the local Target store, right? We want customer service because we want people to come back. Right. We don't want them to go to Publix or Walmart or wherever else. But in state government, it's not like I can hop over the border and go to a neighboring state to get a service. There isn't that common. So why does it? But
there are kind of the bottom line public goods that I think we need to be serving, and I think, again, it's come into much clearer focus for me over the last year and a half, working on programs around direct relief for rental assistance and, you know, mortgage assistance. That's pretty basic needs for people. If you don't have that, you know, all the other things, all the other ills that we have in society are magnified in the education system and, you know, other social services and crime and all that. Those things are part and parcel of people not having that. And so, you know, good customer service and being able to, you know, to serve that constituency and get things done for them is serving a public need, and there isn't anybody else who's going to do that. You know, the nonprofit world gets better at doing it, but they're resource challenged, and, you know, organizationally and functionally, it's more challenging for them. And so, you know, good customer service means people get to keep doing those basic fundamental public goods, you know, and they get the benefit of that. And again, I think that's why lots of us ultimately kind of choose this route for at least a portion of our.
So if I hear you correctly, you're saying that customer service is public service. That's the point. Like, that's why you joined the department. It's everything.
I think I may have you come and, you know, give a speech to
We spin for a living. That's why we run NASCAR TV. That's right. No, that's great. Joel, any final recommendations? So again, I'm very aware that new chief administrative officers are about to walk into that room right across the hallway from us. Or they would be, but Jade is guarding the door, not letting anybody disturb our soundtrack. What advice would you give to them in this theme? Like, when they go to bed at night, how do they know they're doing a good job in terms of serving their residents and citizens of their states?
I think it surrounds listening to the various players there. I said, I have a department of 1,400 people, trying to listen to them because they're much closer to delivering those services, and they're the ones who are required to continually do that. And we have layered on all this other, these crisis support measures over the last year. So listening to them and being transparent and being communicative with them, but also wherever possible, getting real-time feedback from your customer, whoever that is. Again, and it's a diverse group, whether it's your colleagues in in cabinet agencies, in the executive branch, whether it's the governor's office. I think I'll finish kind of where I started. We have 50 different people who do these types of jobs, even more than that, because people have pieces of it. You have 50 different governors and 50 different types of administrations. Every state's a little different, but there are kind of fundamental things that we're all dealing with around real estate portfolio, around procurement and HR to some extent. And there are lessons to be learned, and taken and modified and made. Trying to make sure those reflect the details of your own problem in your own state and your community. And so I think it's about that active listening and understanding that it's a humbling job, and nobody gives you a playbook when you come in. Nobody gave a thing saying, okay, here are the first 10 things you want to do. You better just go do it. And we live in a time now where, even more importantly than ever, you got to be a doer and a responder.
So don't go to bed expecting to get an A grade or a 10 out of 10 from everybody, but even your visual language is like, have your fingers be taking lots of pulses, and if it's overall going in the right direction,
50
sleep
plus
well
1
at
is pretty good at this point.
Joel, this has been a blast. Thank you so much for your time. We're going to have a great time at the NASCA Summit. I'll see you over coffee soon.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.